Welcome to the podcast about venture capital, where investors and founders alike can learn how VCs make decisions and reach conviction. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Welcome back to TFR for another edition of Investor Stories. On this segment, the experts talk about a startup that failed and the causes of that failure. Here's the segment called Mortems. On this special segment, we have Minnie Ingersoll of 10110. Minnie, can you tell us a story about a portfolio company that failed and why it failed?
Knock on wood, right now, none of the ones that I've led have failed. I could talk about one in our portfolio that's just winding down right now, but I'm not super close to Joymode, but it's a fantastic company. I think had the chance to, Joymode is, you get to rent items rather than owning them, all sorts of like amazing things that you want on like a one-off basis, like a giant slip and slide or like a movie projector for your backyard or like these big, and some smaller items too. But so sort of changing the way we do ownership of, so we don't have to own so much stuff. But the economics didn't work out. And unfortunately that company is winding down, but selling some of their amazing stuff right now.
On today's special segment, we have Jim Douglas of Fulcrum Equity Partners. Jim, can you tell us a story about a portfolio company that failed and why it failed?
Yeah, so we had one in the, so when mobile infrastructure was really just coming out. Think about when apps started coming out, you had every TV and radio station wanted the weather and TV app, right?
Yep.
And that evolved in the news app. Well, originally they wanted there was a business in Atlanta that was running all that infrastructure. And they were getting recurring fees for doing that. They had a competitor in North Carolina. Another firm about our size was backing that one, and we were all doing pretty well. And then it became really important, because all TV and radio stations realized, wow, this is a critical part of our infrastructure. They wanted to bring all that back in-house, but they still wanted us to help with the advertising piece of it. Well, just living off ad revenues, we would have never gotten into the business if that were the business, right? And not to mention Google and Facebook dominating. You can see their dominance of the space. So pricing went down and our little cut of CPM wasn't big enough to even run a business on. So we actually sold off that remaining pieces of that business. That was probably one to see that went down, just changed really, really quickly that it comes to mind.
On today's special segment, we have MG Siegler of GV. MG, can you tell us a story about a portfolio company that failed and why it failed?
Sure. So the one that's also top of mind right now is there's a company called Unboxed, which Eric Fang is actually another VC. I don't know if you've ever talked to him. He works at McLeiner. So he was working on this project. He's a longtime entrepreneur. He's been at Hulu, actually, and was at several other companies, Flipboard, in the past. And so he basically has this core team that he's worked with multiple times. And they set out to create a product around the video unboxing space, seeing how big of a segment that was in the YouTube space, right? Like, so, there's kids who get paid millions of dollars, it seems like, a year to unbox toys, right? And but there's also tech product unboxing, and it's not a new concept, but it is interesting how big it's become. And so they set out to basically create a product around that and figure out if there's a commerce angle to it, right? So, what's the obvious thing to do after you're done watching the new iPhone unboxing? Well, it would be to buy the new iPhone. And YouTube has some elements of that, but it's not as seamless as it could be, and certainly not baked for mobile first. And so that's what those guys had set out to do. And Eric actually wrote a post about it recently on Medium, just doing a sort of postmortem about what didn't work. And long story short, I thought it was a compelling post and very good thoughts around what didn't work. And it boils down to everyone's trying to unbundle YouTube at this point because it's such a behemoth. It's so big. It's watched by so many people, and people are now trying to take those eyeballs and see if there's different verticals specific within YouTube that can be their own standalone thing. And so, one obvious one is sort of what's going on with Twitch, right? With video game streaming. But there have been a few others that people have tried to break out into their own, and some have worked, Twitch being a good example of something that's worked, but others haven't. And, Eric's point in sort of thinking back about what didn't work about trying to break out the unboxing vertical was, multifold. There's a lot going on there, but I think his high level takeaway is that maybe we're not ready for the great unbundling of YouTube yet. It's not to say that it will never happen, but maybe it's only going to happen amongst a few, very select few verticals. And part of the reason might be what we were talking about earlier, that, there's so much competition for eyeballs right now that it's very, very hard to be able to launch something new that's going to break in and take up some of that space. And so a lot of these bigger players are well positioned. We talked about Disney and Netflix, of course, but YouTube's right up there, right? In a different sort of category, but it's still about eyeballs watching video on screens. And so, they're a behemoth for sure. And it's hard to be able to figure out a way to get into people's lives. Again, Twitch is an example of a product and service that was able to do it because they have such a hardcore demographic around video gaming, and they created a new use case, right? Watching and communicating around watching other people play video games. And that didn't happen in the unboxing space. It's not to say that it will never happen, but I do think that there's still compelling elements to it. Certainly the shopping angle, the whole newfangled QVC elements. Can that be, replicated in some way in our new mobile society? Seems like a good thesis, but with so many investments that I look back upon, so much of it ends up just being not the right time, and things come about again, and then eventually maybe it will be the right time. And unfortunately with Unbox, it just wasn't the right time.
On today's special segment, we have James Currier of NFX. James, can you tell us a story about a portfolio company that failed and why it failed?
I'll give you an example. There's a company called Wheelwell, which was a social commerce company. So I invested in Poshmark, actually wrote part of the business plan on this floor I'm sitting on right now, here in my office, back in the day, 9 years ago or 8 years ago. And so I like social commerce. I think that if you can amplify commerce with social, like House, I'm an investor in House, and I like these types of things. And so this company was called Wheelwell, and it was basically housed for auto parts, auto build outs. And this is a market that most people don't know how big it is. So people who are putting on new mufflers, new fancy, brakes, new wheels onto their car, retrofits to soup up their cars. This is a big market. It's about $68 billion in the US. It's a huge market.
Wow.
Right. I mean, that's a big market. It's like as big as, the whole online ad industry was, 5-6 years ago, 8 years ago. So it's a big market. Nobody knows how big it is. I like social, and I like, I don't like commerce because of the margins, but I like the idea of combining them because you get virality, you get SEO, you get engagement, you get higher propensity to pay because somebody's in the environment. So so we invested in Wheelwell, and Wheelwell ended up failing. A couple things happened. One, the margins. So the average order value in House is really high because it has to do with your house. The average order value with Wheelwell was closer to $400 or $500, which wasn't quite enough to get it there. The second thing is that the margins in that industry are brutal, right? So we were hoping to get sort of 10 to 15% margins. It ended up being lower than that. And, you go below 15% net, and, it's really hard to do any business. You have to do it so perfectly at every stage in order to survive that it's just unlikely you're going to be able to do that. And then the third thing was that the investors, other than me, had a real trouble with it because most people haven't invested in social commerce successfully. And so they looked at the social numbers and said, well, there's a good reason not to invest. They looked at the e-commerce numbers and said, there's good reasons not to invest. Everybody was finding reasons not to invest because you actually have to kind of make two things work in the investor's mind, both social and commerce. So a lot of investors backed away because of the complexity of that or having to believe in both things. And then the third thing is that, the second thing for the VCs was tough was they just didn't understand this market. Most VCs aren't retrofitting their cars with mufflers. And so as a result, you had probably 60 or 70% of people they just don't understand the market. And so as, the company grew to, it went from sort of 50,000 in revenue to 500,000 in revenue and 650. It still wasn't enough to get it more funding. And so we made the hard decision to not have it go forward for now. Now the team has kept it going. The team's phenomenal and they are continuing to run it. They're continuing to look at ways to bring it back. But that was a disappointing outcome for a company I thought could actually work, and it had a house antecedent. And if you look at where people spend their money, it's sort of on their house, it's on their travel, and it's on their car. And so it's not that far away from the highest value sector. So the whole thing sort of made sense, but then it didn't in the end.
That will conclude this installment of Investor Stories. If you're enjoying the program and would like to see it continue, take a moment and leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Also, if you'd like updates on new content from TFR, as well as the top 10 VC articles every week, go to fullratchet.net and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that will wrap things up for today. Until next time, over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks for joining me.